Hi everyone, and welcome to another Supports and Accommodations video series video. This video is going to focus today on understanding the M-Step and My Access read aloud and text-to-speech options. My name is Jen Paul. I'm the English Learner and Accessibility Assessment Specialist at the Michigan Department of Education. The topics that we're going to cover today are a review of our Supports and Accommodations framework, just touching on how to make sure that you're selecting appropriate supports and accommodations for students. And then we will, of course, be reviewing those read aloud and text-to-speech options for both M-Step and My Access. If you're not familiar with our supports and accommodations framework that we use here within the state, some of the big ideas to keep in mind as you think about what is appropriate for students when it comes time for the assessments is you've really got to make those team-based decisions. Even for students that are English learners, for all your students really, you've got to make individual student decisions because it is certainly not the case that all students have the same needs. You should be looking to provide supports that the students are using in their regular instruction, their day-to-day classroom experience to the extent possible that you're able to. Sometimes you just can't offer everything that a student might be using regularly during their day-to-day instruction because, one, it might invalidate the construct that we are assessing, or two, it's just not an exact match, but and we may not be able to offer that for the assessment, but we might be able to get close with a support or accommodation. We have three different types of supports and accommodations for our students. So these are the categories that things are going to fall into. We have a universal tools category. So when you look at our documentation, if you see something called a universal tool, this is going to be something that's available to all students. And the use is primarily student-driven. An example of this is going to be something like your highlighter, where if a student's taking the online M-Step assessment, they're going to have access to that highlighter on every single test question, no matter what. You don't have to turn this on for any student. It's just there for everybody. And as I just mentioned, the student's ability to use it is driven by when they think they need it. The next tier is what we call designated supports. These are things that are going to be available to students who have a specific need. And that need is going to be driven primarily by an educator or a team of educators that are deciding and saying, yes, this student actually needs this to be able to function well in the classroom academically and also on state assessments. An example of this might be something like when a student needs a English learner support, such as a bilingual word-to-word glossary. That's something that a student could have access to depending on the M-Step assessment. And again, the need to use that at the time of the assessment is going to be based on the educator allowing them to have that tool at the time of the assessment, having made that decision prior to the actual assessment day. Accommodations is the third tier of support types. These are things that are only going to be available to students with disabilities who have a need for the accommodation outlined in their 504 plan or IEP. So for example, Braille. Braille is an accommodation for our M-Step purposes. And of course, a student that needs Braille is going to be a student with disabilities. However, not all students with disabilities need Braille. So the need to use Braille is going to be outlined in their IEP or 504 plan. So for today's topic, when we think about read aloud and text-to-speech options, we're really talking about students using these support types who are going to likely be students who are struggling readers, students who have attention disorders, and even students who have visual impairments. So So text-to-speech and read-aloud are the most complicated support and accommodation types for educators to understand. I'm going to try and break this down as simply as I can for folks in this video. What you need to know primarily to start with is there are two types of text-to-speech and read-aloud options. One is going to be a designated support. One is going to be an accommodation, and we will talk about those differences. Let's start with probably the most complex of the two supports and accommodation types for text-to-speech and read-aloud. We're going to start by looking at what is available for students if they're taking the M-STEP English Language Arts assessment. Let's start with the designated support option. If a student is going to be taking the online M-STEP ELA assessment, they could, in grades 3 through 8, have access to the text-to-speech option, which provides students with the questions and answer options read aloud to them. You can group administer students using this particular designated support as long as everybody's using headphones, because you don't want to interfere or cause a distraction for other students that are also in the room testing. If you have a student who needs it, you can use the read aloud option, meaning questions and answer options can be read aloud to students by an in-person reader. So if the student really needs to have someone with them testing that's providing that support because of, let's say, lip reading purposes, or they need to have that person that they're familiar with being the test administrator to do that, and maybe text-to-speech is not a great option for students because it's a computer-generated voice, then this would be another good option that can be used. So as I mentioned, the questions and answer options can be read aloud to students by an in-person reader. It's going to require, however, that you do the test in a one-on-one setting, and the test administrator must use the read-aloud guidelines found in the supports and accommodations guidance document. That's the designated support option, okay? Now let's talk about the accommodation version of this. Again, we're still talking about the M-STEP ELA test, but if you have a student in grades 6 through 8 that needs this, you can do that. You would enable what's called text-to-speech passage. This is not only going to provide students with the questions and answer options read aloud to them, but it will also read aloud the text for the reading passages themselves. Again, you can group administer this part of things as long as the students are using headphones. And the read aloud option in grades 6 through 8 for the accommodation version of this is the same thing. All we're really adding on for the accommodation is that now you can read aloud the reading passages. One of the questions that often comes up is, why can we do reading passages in grades 6 through 8, but not in grades 3 through 5? The reason for that is because of what it is that we're trying to assess in grades 3 through 5. So there is no option at all for students to have the reading passages read aloud to them in grades 3 through 5, period. It's not a designated support option. It's not an accommodation option. You just do not have that as an option at all for students. Continuing on with M-STEP English Language Arts, let's just touch briefly on the paper pencil option. So we've talked about what you can do for the online testing. Let's talk about paper pencil testing. In grades 3 through 8, you can do something similar to what you had as an option for the online test in terms of a read aloud. The questions and answer options can be read aloud to students by an in-person reader. This can be done in a small group administration as long as the students are in the same grade level. And the test administrator, again, must use what's called the Read-Aloud Guidelines, which are found in the Supports and Accommodations Guidance document. The accommodation version of this for grades 6 through 8 It's exactly as I just explained for the online version. All you're really adding on is the ability to now read the reading passages aloud to students who might need it. Again, you can administer this in a small group setting as long as students are in the same grade level, and you've got to use those read-aloud guidelines that are in the supports and accommodations guidance document. And again, whether the student's online or paper pencil, students in grades 3 through 5 do not have the option to have reading passages read aloud to them. M-Step Mathematics is going to be very similar to what we just saw with the M-Step English Language Arts options. The only difference here really is that there are no reading passages because that's just not a part of what the test items and questions actually include for students. So when you look in the system and you look at our guidance and other documentation, you're only going to see a designated support option for mathematics. That's not to say that a student who has an IEP or 504 plan can't use this as a designated support. They can use it if they need text-to-speech, no problem. All it means is that there's not an extra category that's more narrowly defined. That's all that means. So for students taking the online assessment, there's a text-to-speech option. Questions and answer options can be read aloud to students, and it can be group administered with students using headphones. Students can also have that read aloud option by using someone in person sitting next to them, reading those questions and answer options aloud to them, but you will have to do that in a one-on-one setting. And again, the test administrator needs to use the read aloud guidelines. Paper pencil test is going to be exactly the same as what I just covered for the M-Step ELA test. You can read the questions and answer options aloud to students. You can do it in a small group as long as they're in the same grade. And you've got to use those read aloud guidelines. Social studies is exactly the same as what we just covered for the M-Step mathematics. You do have a designated support text-to-speech option. You've got a read aloud option if they're taking the paper pencil assessment. However, what you don't have in this case is a read aloud option for students taking the online test. So if you have students that need the read aloud option, they really need to be taking the paper pencil test in this case because there is a reader's script that goes with those assessments. The reader's script is exactly what you think it is. It's a script. It's going to provide you with exactly what it is that you should be reading aloud to the student for these two particular assessments. That's different from the read aloud guidelines. The read aloud guidelines that I spoke about that are for the M-Step Math and English Language Arts assessments, they are guidelines. It's not a script. It just tells you generally this is how you would say these words or these types of words, etc. But it's not a script per se. However, the script does exist for science and social studies. And so if a student needs to have that in-person oral experience for the assessment, then the reader script must be ordered with the paper pencil assessment. There is also an English DVD that can be ordered for science and social studies. So that again presents those students with the same information essentially and the same support that they would be getting if someone were to use the reader script. Essentially, it just makes the administration easier on a test administrator. So who can use the text-to-speech and read aloud designated support or accommodation? This is a frequently asked question. So within the text-to-speech and, within our supports and accommodations guidance document, we have a text-to-speech and read-aloud decision guidance section that essentially answers this question for educators, or rather it aids educators in answering this question for students. This is a screenshot of what it looks like. and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but this should be done with a group of educators that know the student at the local level. So it's split into two sections, you'll notice. The first is, does the student have an IEP or 504 section? If they don't, then you would go and look at the second section, which is in the middle of this screen. The student does not have an IEP or 504 section. And you'll see the notation here that, just as a reminder, these students are not eligible to use the text-to-speech passage or read-aloud passage accommodations. They're only then eligible to use the designated support option. But which students should use the designated support option? This will walk you through some questions that can help you better determine that. It is not the case that you should be enabling text-to-speech as a designated support for all of your students, for a whole school, for a whole district. That is not the intention of this type of support. Doing things like that will likely mean that you would show up on our monitoring list, and we'd want to have a conversation with you about how you're making these decisions, why you're making these decisions, and whether these things are really the best for students given their individual student needs. So you've got to think about this at the individual student level, both for students with disabilities and for students without disabilities. So when you look at that guidance and go through those questions that I just shared that are in the supports and accommodations guidance document, you're looking for a preponderance of evidence that should exist in the appropriate section that you're working within, rather than just a few check marks in boxes for the student to be provided this level of support. So there's no magic number that says, well, if there's 4 questions that you've answered yes to, then that's the magic number and you should use text-to-speech. Or 6, or all 12 questions, let's say, are answered as a yes. That's your magic number. It's really about, again, making the best decision for the individual student based on as much evidence as you have, and there should be a lot of evidence. When students log in and are actually taking the assessment, this is basically what they're going to see when they're using text-to-speech. So they do have options within the system to control not just the volume of the text-to-speech that they're using, but also the speed of the text-to-speech that they're using. And then there is an option for follow along to be enabled or disabled. Now, by default for the M-STEP assessment, the follow along option is going to be enabled. Follow along is simply the highlighting of words on the screen for students as the text-to-speech is reading them aloud. So it will, it's a blue highlight, blue coloration that will show up and display for students on the individual words as they're being read aloud. As I mentioned earlier in this video, the text-to-speech option within the engine itself is it's a digital voice. It's a high quality digital voice, but it is a digital voice. And so if you have some concerns about whether or not that's going to be appropriate for some of your students that might need the text-to-speech option, whether it's text-to-speech passage or as the accommodation, or whether it's the designated support text-to-speech option, it doesn't matter. They're using the same voice. Then our recommendation is to certainly have the student go through the online tools training, the OTTs that are available on our michigan.gov/MSTEP website, to make sure that this voice is something that they really are comfortable using before you get to the day of the assessment. For my access, text-to-speech is defaulted for all students. So it's just going to be there for everybody. You don't need to go into the system and turn it on or off for particular students. However, as I just mentioned, the audio and the follow along can be changed, and you have flexibility, and the student has flexibility in terms of the controls within the system. What is read aloud to students for the text-to-speech for My Access follows the same procedures as what is provided to students if you were to use the do not read aloud tables that are part of the My Access assessments. So it's not the case that the students would be getting more things read aloud to them if they use text-to-speech than they would if they were taking a paper pencil form, just using the do not read aloud tables. It's going to be, they're going to mirror each other. There's a lot more information that you can find in our supports and accommodations guidance document that I have referenced multiple times in this video. So please go out to any of the assessment web pages. You can go out to michigan.gov/MSTEP and find this document there, or michigan.gov/MyAccess and find the supports and accommodations guidance document there. If you have any questions after viewing this video, please send them to mde-oeaa@michigan.gov. Thank you.